seats. Good morning, everyone. Don't be so formal. It's Saturday. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you very much. My name is David Gray. I'm the host of the Calgary Eye Opener on CBC Radio 1. And today I will be your master of ceremonies. In the audience, if you look around at the other faces, many of you will know who's in the room. Almost 87 members of the legislature, each of them have invited a friend or a guest from their constituency to attend with them. We have folks from many of the organizations that contribute to the fabric of this province, and many members of the general public as well who will be here this morning. I also would like to say hello to viewers at home. We are being live streamed, so mind your manners. There's cameras around. Watch where you put your hands. It's good to be here. It's nice to be asked. Oh, who am I kidding? It's a Saturday morning. What are we doing here at 9 a.m.? A meeting hall full of politicians and academics and journalists and, oh, God help us, economists. It should be an interesting group. In Fort McMurray right now, people are starting a lazy day drinking coffee at Tim Hortons. In Edmonton, someone's on White Avenue opening up a newspaper. In Medicine Hat, they're lacing up their skates for a hockey tournament, and I'm told it's at the Hockey Hounds Centre this morning. In Banff, they're playing a 3-on-3 hockey down Main Street. In Lethbridge, at the Penny Cafe, the muffins are ready. I'm going to call it the Nickel Cafe soon, I'm told. In the Crow's Nest, they're loading up snowmobiles as we speak for a weekend of sledding. And right now, some teenager who got up before dawn this morning in Calgary is at Lake Louise. And it's what, 9:05. So he's about to set first tracks down a ski run. And would you look where we are, sitting in this room, in our Sunday best on a Saturday morning. Luckily, there's a good cast assembled. This day has the potential, at least, for some great discussions. And there are some fantastic moderators that they brought in to help with those discussions. So what are we doing here? We're going to hear the official version shortly from the Finance Minister, Doug Horner. He's first up. But here's the thing. Part of my job is to put the cards on the table. This is shaped to be an exercise to gather real opinions that may help shape the future economic direction of a province that currently has a set of books that doesn't add up. And if that's what happens, this will be a Saturday really well spent. But you know there's critics out there, and maybe you've heard them, and detractors who say that this is some kind of a PR event staged a month before a difficult budget. Let's work this Saturday to prove them wrong. So those are the stakes. On the good side, clearly no one vetted my opening remarks, so that's a good sign. I'm here as a journalist and as an observer, and I'm looking forward to the day. So here are the quick housekeeping points, the rules of the day. Today's summit has 3 elements: panel discussions, debates among the panelists, and Q&As involving the audience here in the room and on Twitter. If you wish to participate in the conversation or ask a question on Twitter, the hashtag is, where's the mayor, he'll know it already, AB Summit. Feel free to tweet anything from today's session. That is AB Summit, all one word, hashtag AB Summit. Apart from that, if you've got a phone, and everybody does, please put it on vibrate because we don't want to interrupt folks today. It's just like a movie theater. Questions, when there are questions, should be no more than 1 minute long and should actually be questions. So somewhere in your stream of consciousness, please include a what or a how or a why, if you could. That'll help the discussion a lot. And we're going to try to keep it to 1 question per person at a time, please. Media are in the room. They may approach you for commentary. Talk to them. They don't bite, at least most of them don't, and you know most of them. You are, of course, not obliged. I'm asked to pass that on. There are also a couple of young people who will be roaming about doing quickie interviews on their phones the way they can. Those interviews will be uploaded into the Summit website. Again, you're encouraged to respond, but you are not obliged. So, without further ado, I give you the pride of the riding of Spruce Grove, St. Albert, the Finance Minister of Alberta, Doug Horner.
Well, thank you very much, Dave. Good morning, all, and welcome. On behalf of the Government of Alberta, I'd like to thank each of you for coming here this morning We've had a great response to the invitations that we put out, and obviously we have a wonderful turnout. I want to take a minute to thank you very, very much for taking time out of your very busy schedules to join us today on a Saturday. I also want to extend a very warm welcome to those of you who are watching us online from the comfort of your living room. We can't see you, but you can see us. So we don't know what you're doing right now, but you can certainly see that we're going to be busy all day. We're live streaming all day, so folks who are giving up their Saturday can join us to do so. When Premier Redford announced this summit in her televised address last month, she said that this event will not solve everything in one day, but it will allow us to continue our conversation. This summit is about keeping that conversation going and keeping our focus on what is really the end goal, ensuring that we are the province we need to be in 20 years from now. We brought a broad spectrum of voices to the table today. Summit participants come from private industry, from not-for-profit, and from academia. We have economists and bankers, business leaders, and media. We have government watchdogs and government MLAs from all parties. The issues facing our province today cut across all political lines, and I look forward, and I know the Premier looks forward, to the discussions that encompass all points of view. We need to hear all perspectives as we tackle the issues facing our province today, like addressing our immediate shortfall in revenues and preparing Alberta for a significant growth in population and all the benefits and the challenges that go with that. So today's summit will include some very interesting, as David said, some very insightful, and no doubt very lively discussions. And I know many of you are looking forward to them all. Before we begin that conversation, I'd like to set some context and talk a little bit about why we're here. First, we need to identify exactly where here is. Alberta is actually in a pretty unique position. We have one of the strongest economies in Canada. In fact, last year our economy expanded almost twice as fast as other regions. We had the lowest unemployment rate, and we created more jobs than any other province last year. People from all over are moving to Alberta because of our jobs and because of our economy. And we're going to keep growing. Our population is expected to grow to more than 5 million people over the next 20 years. By 2032, we will have integrated the equivalent of a city the size of Calgary into our province. The logical question here would be, what's the problem? Right now, the problem is that Alberta is facing one of the biggest fiscal challenges this province has faced in a considerable time. The Premier did speak to this in her address last month, and I and many of my colleagues have been speaking about it for the past few weeks to the media, to the Calgary Chamber of Commerce, to the C.D. Howe Institute. Some of you may have even attended those events. So it's been pretty hard to escape the message. Even if you were trying to tune me out, and you wouldn't be the first, you probably still know that Alberta is looking at about a $6 billion revenue shortfall. Alberta's fiscal situation is an issue. It's a serious one with serious repercussions, but it is only part of a bigger picture. And it's not the only reason we're holding this economic summit. The Premier's talked about holding an annual economic summit because Alberta's challenges are not limited to this year. And certainly there will be discussion of Alberta's current fiscal challenges today, and while I'm sure we will hear some great ideas about how to address today's issues, the purpose of today is to focus on long-term solutions. And we intend to keep these conversations going. We intend to continue engaging Albertans, just like we're doing in the results-based budgeting process, and just like we've done with the fiscal framework and the budget consultations last fall. We will continue bringing Albertans like you together to bring your perspectives and ideas to the table so we can continue building on those discussions about what Alberta's future should look like. And more importantly, so we can talk about how we're going to get there. This is why we're all here now. It's not an exaggeration to say that the conversations we have here will set the tone for our future. So here's an overview of what today's summit holds. First, one ground rule throughout today's discussions, I want you to keep an eye on the long term. We need to answer this question. What do we need to do now to ensure Alberta's continued success 20 years from now? And certainly we have our immediate challenges, as I've said, and we must address those, and we will. But how we solve those issues will ultimately set the stage for a new Alberta. As the Premier has said, these are once-in-a-generation challenges and an opportunity to put Alberta on the right track. Alberta is in a unique situation, and we know there are no one-size-fits-all solutions, so we want to hear from you what you think. What we want is to hear a broad spectrum of perspectives and experiences, and this summit will help lay the groundwork by posing questions that will drive your discussions today. There will be 4 panels, each led by a moderator, and each panel will include 3 or 4 people from diverse backgrounds. These panels are going to focus on 4 distinct themes. First panel session will set the stage and define the problem Alberta is facing today. Panelists will talk about oil prices, the differential, our revenue, and the potential need to fundamentally change the way we manage our energy resources. The second panel will talk about managing Albertans' expectations and discuss what services Albertans really need, particularly in a world that is quickly changing. Besides being affected by outside global factors, Alberta's own face is changing. A growing population and shifting demographics are bringing both new opportunities and challenges. So what needs to happen to ensure a sustainable future? What do we need to do that? The third panel session will look at Alberta's revenue mix. Currently, our oil and gas funds 30% of our budget. What do we need to do to be less reliant on such volatile revenue sources? Do we need to change the mix? How? And the fourth panel session will discuss responsible spending. In the face of today's fiscal challenges, this government is having to make some tough decisions when it comes to spending. But how can we keep our spending in check when Alberta's population continues to grow and pressures from that growth continue to build? This session will look at how we're spending today, and we'll talk about if it's the right mix of spending for the future. The summit should wrap up at about 4 or 4:30, and until then, every one of the sessions requires your input. Today's sessions will be shaped by both your questions and your answers, and these in turn will shape future conversations. So what will Alberta look like 20 years from now? What will a growing number of Albertans and their families require in terms of programs and services, public infrastructure? And how does the province meet the expectations of its citizens while maintaining fiscal responsibility and continuing to prepare for generations even further down the road? How do we maintain Alberta's economic success, not just today, but for the long term? So we have a very busy day ahead of us, so I'm going to end my remarks here, other than to once again thank you all very, very much for participating. I look forward to some very interesting conversations that I know will come from these panels. Good luck. Have a great day. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Mr. Horner. We're going to go straight to our first panel discussion. Their task, as you just heard, is to define the fiscal dilemma that faces this province. How did we get here? And are we here to stay? To introduce our first panel, I'd like to welcome the moderator, Todd Hirsch. For anyone who doesn't know, Todd is the remarkably well-dressed gentleman down here. Todd is the senior economist at ATB Financial. For over 20 years, he's worked as an economist at Canadian Pacific Railway, the Canada West Foundation, and the Bank of Canada. He's also taught economics at the University of Calgary for almost a decade. Ladies and gentlemen, Todd Hirsch.
Well, thank you so much, David, for the introduction, and I can't tell you how pleased I am to be here this morning and to be part of kicking off the very first panel. Actually, what I'm going to do is ask the panelists to come up now while I'm giving the opening remarks, and then when we're ready to go into the panel discussion, you're in place and ready to go. And I've got to put on glasses. As Premier Redford mentioned in her address to the province in January, the government is starting an important dialogue with Albertans about the future of the province. This may be a once-in-a-generation opportunity to really look at how we manage our financial resources and whether the models we are using are the right ones for the future. Our task in the first session this morning is to build a foundation for the discussions we'll be having throughout the day. The central question we'll be discussing is this: what is the specific nature of the problem or problems we need to solve? Sounds simple enough, but without a good handle on that, we'll have trouble coming up with workable solutions. Here's how the session will go. We'll have a little over an hour, from 9:15 to 10:25. After my comments at the beginning here, each of our panel members will be making an opening statement of no longer than 5 minutes. Now, I'm warning you panel members, will be strict in ensuring the 5-minute. Angus, I'm watching you especially. I'm teasing. Strict 5 minutes in ensuring you stick to the time limit, so don't be afraid to take less than 5 minutes, because we do want to leave lots of time for what comes next. After the opening statements, we'll be having some free-ranging discussion among our panel members, and then we'll be taking questions from the audience. I speak not only of the audience in this room, but also our larger audience, the Albertans who are watching our session over the internet and who will be invited to submit questions or discussion topics via Twitter. My job as moderator is not to steer our group toward consensus, and we remind ourselves consensus is not our goal here. In fact, there's nothing more boring than economists that all agree, so I'm hoping that you guys do have some provocative statements and that you're not all in consensus. Consensus is not our goal. What the government is hoping to gain from the summit is a better understanding of how Albertans see the issues and the range of ideas to consider. Many Albertans have become aware in recent weeks that the government's revenue projections have fallen rapidly from where they were at budget time last year, thanks in large part to the widening differential. And I love the way that the word differential is now part of our language in this province. Both in terms of what the price Alberta bitumen sells for compared to the price of North American oil, but also what oil sells for in world markets. While the widening of the differential was not expected when the government presented its budget, the big question is this: is it here to stay? I hope the panel will explore the factors behind this revenue problem and weigh in on whether it's a temporary blip that we can ride out, or whether this is the new normal that requires a paradigm shift. So, to help us answer these questions, we're pleased to have our first panel this morning. Now, what I'm going to do is introduce each one of them, and then I will give them each their 5 minutes. On my far right, Angus Watt, Edmonton's media darling. Angus is the managing director of Individual Investor Services, Angus Watt Advisory Group. To his left, Dr. Mike Percy, the Stanley A. Milner Professor and Dean, University of Alberta Business School, and also famous for writing my entrance letter recommendation to grad school a few years ago. To his right, Peter Terzakian, very well-known Calgary author and chief energy economist and managing director of ARC Financial Corp. And Michael Holden, who took my old job as a senior economist at the Canada West Foundation. So what I'm going to do now is turn it over. Let's start with Angus. 5 minutes, Angus. We'll turn it over to you for opening comments. How do you want to do that? I think probably just from there. It saves some transition. Is that okay? We have the panelists from the table. So go ahead, Angus. 5 minutes.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. Madam Premier, Albertans, friends. It's taken me 5 minutes to read this, so tabled. Listen, we're here today for a conversation, and one of the things I remember very clearly is a conversation I had with Dr. Allard, who's a mentor and an icon to us in Alberta, especially in the Edmonton area. And one day I was in his office, and he said to me, Angus, what are the 3 most important things investing in real estate? And I was much younger at the time, and I said, location, location, location. And he went, ah, so, which meant, you're wrong, grasshopper. He said it's staying power. And it's interesting, the conversation that we're going to be having today, one of the things we're going to be looking for is staying power. And this is something that he taught me a long, long, long time ago. And it's interesting. So in all the speeches I've done for the last decade, I talk about the staying power, whether it's in investing or your personal business or a corporation. We also keep in mind that I've always said over the last decade that we're addicted to growth and we're addicted to oil. Now this year, I've added a new addiction. And it's important. We're addicted to low interest rates, not just here in Alberta, not here in Canada, but across the world on a global basis. The challenge we have with addiction is that it's okay when you're on it, but when you have to get off it, there's going to be a short-term pain for a long-term gain. That's something to keep in mind. Now I'm going to run through these slides this morning because we've got some other panels talking a lot about oil, and the different situations we're in. So what I want to do, though, before I get started, I saw this during Christmas time, and I thought, isn't this interesting? Because our neighbors to the south, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, are always pointing the fingers at the other person and say, you spend too much money. And it's interesting, when you're in a growing economy, such as the United States of America, you know what? Doesn't matter whether you're red or blue, you're spending more money because you're building for the future. One of the problems that we have here, quite simple. All of us have talked about labor, the skilled labor, and the challenges we have in Alberta trying to find it. The infrastructure, the pipelines, the costs, the overruns, and we all know that we have one market, our major market being the United States of America. Now, I'm sure Peter and others will talk about it, but it's no surprise when you take a look at the world price of oil that it costs us roughly $25 by the time we take our bitumen, transport it, and refine it, and get it down to the Gulf. So in other words, our oil will always, and always has had, a $25 discount. This is just a question of the variance from time to time, especially if you get stuck in infrastructure. I find this slide absolutely amazing because our largest customer, and keep this in mind, we're the largest exporter into the United States. Take a look at the energy that they're producing and how it's just spiked up in the last couple of years. We take a look at the outlook, the forecast, going back to 2008. We thought the United States of America is going to be no different than Europe. It's going to become mature. They're going to become more efficient. Their cars are going to become have better fuel mileage. We take a look at it. We take a look at actually now what we're really using, what they're really using versus what we were thinking just a few years ago. A huge discount of 15% on its way to 30%. We take a look at the global marketplaces, just a share of GDP. As the Premier has pointed out many times in her visits, that we need to get out in the emerging markets because they're now going to be the largest part of the world demand. We take a look at the energy consumption. The world is still absolutely committed and addicted to oil and oil demand. It's just our larger customers finding their own. We take a look at inflation. This is important because you need to understand on 10-year interest rates that the inflation rate, and I can't see with my bifocals, but it's about 3.9% historically, and since 1950 or 1992, it's 1.92%. When you take a look at the next slide, so the cost of money and inflation rate in Canada has come down dramatically. You know, it's interesting. I know Leo's speaking later on today, but on a net basis, our AIMCO fund, our new AIMCO, had a rate of return of over 7%. In the year of 2012, it was over 10%. In the last few weeks or months, the province of Alberta has raised over $1.5 billion at a cost of either under 2% or just over 3%. So when you take a look at long-term inflation versus short-term borrowing costs or long-term borrowing costs for us here in the province, it seems like we're getting effectively discounted money. One of the things that we've used, but we haven't used it nearly enough compared to other provinces, other countries, is the P3. Keep in mind that we want to use the private expertise that we have in this province to either build or rebuild our public infrastructure. The public sector, the government, they set the scope and the purpose of it. But the design, the construction, the financing, the maintenance, the life cycle over 30 years is done by the private enterprise. We take a look at what it is and what it isn't. It is a transfer of risk, so the government doesn't have that risk. It gets completed on time, and there are penalties if it's not done on time. What it's not, it is on the book, so it is part of our debt. It is not a privatization, so we're not giving up a corporation. And at the same time, it's not the sale of real estate because we end up getting it back. So when we look forward, we have used P3s, but we haven't used it in the medical side, we haven't used it in the education as much as other people have done it. We've used it for our roads and schools, but again, when you compare it to the rest of the world, it's a tool that we could be using a lot more of. Our challenge, Todd, on a go-forward basis, is that we're competing in a global economy. The CEO of the Bank of Nova Scotia was saying that just the other day, and he was saying, we have to compete on a global basis. And in Canada, we're not. We're used to a cheap currency. We're used to having the primary resource economy. And when he's not talking about Alberta, he's talking about all of Canada. So the bottom line is we have to compete in a global economy. We are commodity focused. We're blessed from that aspect to it. And we have one major client, and that's our past. Thank you.
Thank you, Angus. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Percy. 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Todd. And just one slight correction. I'm a has-deen. I stepped down on in 2011, and Dr. Joseph Doucette is the Dean of the Alberta School of Business. So we're here to talk about how we got here, and here I believe is a $6 billion potential deficit. So I want to talk about 4 factors. The first is philosophical in nature. It's the reality of extracting and selling natural resources, non-renewable resources. At the end of the day, if you want a sustainable income stream from non-renewable resources, the issue is you extract it, you save the revenue, and you live off the interest income. How much of the interest income you want to use depends on how much you value the future, how much you value intergenerational equity, present consumption versus future consumption. But when you rely on a non-renewable resource and you want sustainability in financing, it's the savings and the interest from that savings that is sustainable in the longer term as opposed to running down the stock. So we know the rate is not 100%, we know the rate's not 0. The issue is where is the appropriate savings rate, and that, as I say, is a trade-off between current versus future consumption. Second factor, and this is a good news, bad news factor, the province is a very adept collector of economic rents. The combination of lease bids, royalties, we capture that revenue. But in the absence of an appropriate savings rate, we then spend that revenue. So when you look at per capita expenditures in Alberta relative to the national average, significantly higher. If you look at tax effort relative to the national average, significantly lower, with the wedge, as we all know, filled by natural resources, and that our capacity to do that is really fueled by our unwillingness to have a positive savings rate. So, yeah, again, when we're in this type of world, the issue that every finance minister faces when there's a shortfall in revenue is this transitory or is it permanent? And that's partly the thrust of today's discussion. And you know, you cross your fingers and hope it's transitory, but I think, as will be suggested, probably there's more downside risk out there than in the past. So third factor, and I think this is structural in nature and has been alluded to by Angus, is that there's been a remarkable change in energy pricing regimes. We've already seen the step change in natural gas pricing. And who would have predicted, and certainly neither private sector forecasters and certainly not government forecasters, projected how quickly natural gas prices would fall from 12 to 3. And that is here for the time being until, in fact, the ring fence around North America and LNG exports increase offshore. So we're looking at a much lower price profile there. If you look at tight formations and what's being extracted in terms of light crude from those formations, one gets the sense of a potential regime change there in terms of pricing. So when you look out there and you combine that with the IEA report on the US becoming a net exporter, you do get the sense that there's a lot more downside risk than upside potential in terms of future financing. And certainly the fact that we're in this midst of rapid application of technologies to the extraction of oil and gas, it means forecasting is even more difficult than it has been in the past. And certainly I think when you look at the forecasts made by this government, federal governments, there wasn't sandbagging there. I mean, this was basically, it's very difficult to forecast energy prices at the best of times, let alone when you're in the midst of a technological revolution. Fourth factor, which builds on these 3 other factors, is the short and medium-term factors, which is the supply glut relative to pipeline access. And we've seen the wide differential between Western Canadian Select and West Texas Intermediate, then versus Brent. And I believe in markets, and I think markets work. And you're seeing the arbitrage right now across markets with, you know, trains heading south, carloads of bitumen, barge loads out of Cushing, and a whole web of other mechanisms to get oil from here, from North Dakota, from Cushing to the Gulf Coast. So I think we will see through time the differentials narrow. I mean, but the real fear is, although the differentials narrow, the whole price profile declines. And that, you know, that again is, I think, the real downside risk. So as I look out there and I say, how did we get here? I think there's 2 or 3 structural factors that have gotten us here, given us, in a sense, put us on the tipping point. Then you have this juxtaposition of short and and medium-term factors related to pipeline access that have tipped us, in a sense, over the precipice. So I think we have to deal with the structural factors, because I do believe market forces will deal with some of the differentials that exist. And the only bottom line for me is I just hope China gets it right, because at the end of the day, if we're going to see a high price profile, it's going to be Asian demand for resources. And if we're going to exploit that, one of the three options or four options that are out there, either west to east, Keystone, Northern Gateway, or to the north, all in the context of some type of Canadian energy strategy. I mean, we have to go down that route, and we have to achieve that type of access. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, the first two panelists have set a very good example with keeping it to about 5 minutes, but now we'll turn to Peter Terzakian. 5 minutes.
How long do you want me to speak?
5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Madame Premier, honorable members, friends, colleagues. Delighted to be here as a Albertan, but equally as a concerned Canadian on some very pressing matters. In the winter of 1977, the Calgary Herald ran a cartoon. The cartoon depicted a picture of Uncle Sam approaching a wintry scene in Canada, a household holding a tin cup. And the caption said, "May I please borrow a cup of energy?" We've always obliged our American neighbors in providing them their energy when they need it. As they grow their economy, we have supplied them with more and more energy, and that has been an embedded assumption that they will always need more and more. And they will always come knocking on our door with a cup saying, "Can we have more?" But today, the cartoon could equally and easily be reversed, where we have a Canadian approaching a scene in the United States holding a cup and saying, "Do you want a cup of energy?" To which the American answer is, "We have enough energy, but we'll take it off your hands. If it's on sale, how about a 25, 30% discount? We'll take it." We have no choice, so we say, "Okay." And we have to sell at a discount. And therein lies the root of the problem being discussed today. In the absence of access to other buyers for our oil and gas, in the absence of getting a fair world price for our oil and gas, we are forced to sell our products to our historical buyer of choice for deep discounts. The consequences of these low prices ripple through to royalties, taxes, and importantly also to reinvestment back into the industry to create jobs, employment, and further taxes and the multiplier effect. Nor is this an Alberta-only problem. The impact is starting to resonate across the country very rapidly. I'll say this is actually good news because it heightens the problem and accelerates potential action. The Alberta government's annual revenues, as I read them in the financial statements, are around $40 billion, a quarter to a third of which comes from the oil and gas business, depending on prices. 3 streams compose the income: royalties, income taxes, and land bonuses. Royalties are the greatest of the 3. I should point out, though, that those are the direct contributions. In fact, it's probably much greater than 1/3 of the Alberta economy. The motel owner in Grand Prairie pays taxes too, and if activity goes down and reinvestment goes down, the motel owner is not going to generate income to pay income taxes. So, the single greatest factor dictating the health of the industry, and therefore the amount of payment to the government, is commodity prices, which translates into the dollar amount of the sales of the industry can generate. In other words, this is equally a discussion about how much revenue the oil and gas industry generates. The higher the number, the greater the government take, and importantly, the greater the reinvestment back into the ground. Here are the aggregated numbers by my calculations. These are my calculations, not the government's calculations. In 2012, the oil and gas industry in Alberta generated $84 billion in revenue. Again, that's Alberta, it's not Western Canada. $84 billion in revenue from the sale of all grades of oil, from bitumen to light oil and natural gas. If we didn't have to put the tin cup out and be forced to take a discount, the number would have been $111 billion, a difference of $27 billion in 2012. This year, I estimate the forfeited revenue by the industry will be $31 billion. So over the course of last year and what we expect this year, almost $60 billion in forfeited revenue, an absolutely staggering amount that perhaps only someone like Bill Gates or Warren Buffett can really comprehend. Because royalties and taxes are so dependent upon the government's industry top line, these revenue shortfalls translate directly into the forfeiture, I estimate, of about $4 billion in royalties last year and about $4.5 billion this year. Does not include the income taxes, which are a little bit more difficult to break out. So the number of $6 billion, I think, is about correct. But again, I think it's important for the crowd to realize this is direct consequence, not the indirect multiplier effects of the motel owner in Grand Prairie and other derivative. Note that the calendar year is what I use, whereas the province uses the March to March year. Will the situation persist? I believe it will, but only until such time as our oil and gas can reach the coastal markets to higher paying customers overseas and around the world. We are in a free market, and as Mike mentioned, I'm very much a free market person and recognize that when you have such money sitting on the table, there are solutions that are being worked out. So that is the good news. How long will it take? Well, here's the good news. Unlike trying to predict global oil and prices, which are volatile, difficult to predict, and somewhat moot, I would tell you that the good news here is that this problem is controllable. We can do something about it. It is in our hands, the problem of this differential. We can take our tin cup to other people and offer them energy. This is the priority, to be able to get the fair value for the commodities that we have made a conscious decision to extract from the ground, to sell to others, never to be seen again. It is incumbent upon us to make sure that we get the highest value for the citizens of this province and for the citizens of this country. Yes, we can debate the predictive abilities of people and the price of oil. I think it's a bit moot. It's a little bit like looking at the dashboard while driving. How fast are we going? We should be looking outside and saying, where are we going? Right? And I think that is what this forum is about. Where are we going? The faster we can offer our energy, not our tin cup of energy, our very valuable cup of energy to others in the world, the better off we will be. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. And now for the last word for the opening comments goes to Michael Holden.
Thanks, Todd. Madam Premier, is my microphone on? Madam Premier, honorable members, and guests, it's a pleasure for me to be here today and to be on a panel with a group of distinguished speakers like this. One of the challenges with going last, of course, is that everyone has said a lot of the things that I was planning on saying myself, and probably more eloquently than I will do, but I have to forge on anyway. I think the situation we find ourselves in now is, I think, pretty well understood at this point by everyone in this room, and we face a massive revenue shortfall because the price we receive for our bitumen and heavy crude has fallen below U.S. benchmark prices. So why is this? And in our view, it's a combination of several factors. First of all, our export pipeline infrastructure has been designed to serve the U.S. market. 99% of our exports of crude oil go to the United States, and those are primarily to the U.S. Midwest. Secondly, we've got booming oil production in the U.S., in the Bakken and other U.S. shale oil plays. Those also funnel into the U.S. Midwest, and creating a logjam at the main distribution hub in Cushing, Oklahoma, where oil's flooding in but unable to flow out at the same rate. Third, this shale oil is a light, sweet variety that is easier to refine and fetches a higher price than Western Canadian crude. And fourth, demand for refined petroleum across North America has been flat over the past few years. So when you combine flat demand with booming production in the U.S. and a lack of pipeline capacity to send Alberta's oil outside of the U.S. Midwest, and you end up with the problem we have today, a growing oil price differential and a $6 billion fiscal shortfall for the provincial government. So the question is this temporary or permanent? Well, certain elements of it are permanent. For one thing, U.S. production is not going to go away. This is not a blip on the radar. As was mentioned, there is an IEA study that suggests that the U.S. could be a net exporter of oil by 2020. But at the same time, this price gap we're facing is the direct result of a transportation problem distorting North American crude oil markets. So industry has plans to address this distortion. The Canada West Foundation recently published a study which looked at the need to expand Western Canada's oil and gas exports to markets in Asia, to the Gulf Coast, and to Eastern Canada. And we found that industry is proposed or planned between 2.7 and 3.4 million barrels per day of additional pipeline capacity to deliver our oil to those markets. And that would be more than enough to close the price gap. But until those plans turn into actions, there's unlikely to be any short-term relief for the province. Most of these projects are years away from construction, and there's a high degree of uncertainty surrounding many of them. Some face so much public opposition that they may never yet be built. But this bitumen bubble that we've been talking about, in my view, is not the real long-term problem facing Alberta. In fact, it's just the latest manifestation of the real problem. Resource revenues in Alberta have fluctuated wildly over the years, whether it's high natural gas prices, $10 a barrel oil in the late 1990s, wars in the Middle East, or this bitumen bubble. The fundamental problem underlying all of those is that Alberta relies heavily on the sale of its non-renewable assets to finance current spending. And so there are two ways we can approach this problem. We can accept that this is an okay way to go and that it's all right to sell our assets to finance current spending on health and education. And if we do that, then we also have to accept that these huge surpluses and deficits are par for the course in Alberta. A colleague of mine put it this way. He said, we could govern like a farmer. We accept that there will be bumper crops in some years and that in other years, hail will wipe out half of the harvest. And the trick is not to panic when times are bad and to save every last penny when times are good. The second way is the more responsible, and I think it's also the more moral from an intergenerational equity standpoint. And that is, we need to move in a direction where we stop funding our current expenditures with the one-time sale of our resources, and instead move to a position where we're funding our current spending from our tax base. Royalty revenues should be saved or used to fund one-time spending on things like infrastructure capital. So rebuilding the Heritage Fund is the most important part of the solution. It secures our future by converting our volatile resource revenues into a continuous, much less volatile revenue stream, a revenue stream that will never run out. We don't have to look any further than Alaska, which has built a fund nearly 3 times the size of Alberta's on a fraction of our resource wealth. So if we can move to a position where where current revenues fund current expenditures, then oil price fluctuations become irrelevant. They just determine the size of the annual contribution to the Heritage Fund. And the bigger that fund grows, the bigger the dividend, and that's more money that can go directly into general revenues. So how do we get there from here? So this isn't something, obviously, that we can do overnight. About 30% of the province's budget comes from oil and gas revenues, and we would need to develop a long-term plan to wean the province off of reliance on those funds. There's also a political challenge in that many Albertans have a distorted view of provincial finances. Because of how much we rely on royalty revenues, there's a huge gap between what Albertans pay in taxes and what they receive in government services. And it's going to be enormously difficult to adjust those expectations. So bringing this back to the bitumen bubble, the long-term solution to this problem is that we need to reduce or eliminate our dependence on these resource revenues to fund healthcare, education, and other current spending items. And we need to redirect those funds to rebuilding the Heritage Fund. Now, there are a lot of outstanding questions about this. How do we adjust public expectations about our fiscal capacity? How do we execute the transition? How much should we contribute to the fund? How should we invest that money? To what purpose should the dividends be put? We need to get to a place where those are the questions we're asking. And if we do that, then we're on our way to solving the revenue problem. Thanks.
Thank you, panelists. We are just about exactly on time. Thank you for those comments. What we're going to do now is move into about 10 minutes of discussion and conversation amongst the panelists. I will remind the audience, though, that you are going to get your opportunity. We have, and I like the precision of this timing I was given. I was told we have 33 minutes, not about 30 or 35. We have 33 minutes. It's like NASA. For questions from the floor, from the Twitter sphere, we will get to that in about 10 minutes, but I just want to prepare you so if you have questions that you can start in advance to think about those. The first kind of question I want to pose to the panelists and get them going, you know, for someone like myself, I've spent my entire life in Alberta, and it always seemed the question looming over our heads was, what happens when oil runs out? This was always this kind of doomsday question looming. But it's interesting now because the question is no longer what happens when oil runs out. I think that question's been answered. We're never going to run out of oil. The question is now, what if no one wants to buy it? Or what if we can't get it out of the province? So my question for the panelists, and I'm not fussy of which one wants to start with that. How long will this differential last? And in fact, will we be able to get our products to markets in the future? Looks like Angus is ready to go.
Well, I got to speak first last time, so. And A starts with Angus, so I thought it just worked, Todd. You know, I think part of the question when we go through this, and you know, Peter goes through the numbers and we take a look at it, but I think there are lots of other questions that are out there too that we need to be talking about. And I think, so we don't know. We make the assumption today that natural gas is good, but I will tell you the state of California says natural gas isn't good. So you kind of take a look and say, what are they talking about? And you just don't know. We take a look at fracking. We know that fracking is bringing in oil or natural gas. And 3 years ago, people were telling me, oh, you can find petroleum in fracking in natural gas, but you'll never find it in oil. Now we find it in oil. So there are so many questions that things are changing right now that I think we've got to be asking these questions and looking for the answers, and we have to look for them on a global basis, because what we think we know today, we don't know. One of the things you learn in life is you get wiser and older, you know less. And I think that's the challenge we have. And you know, I asked the question to myself, maybe we should just refine all of our bitumen, and then we don't have the transportation problem. And then we'll sell it to all of Canada. Why don't we just do that and take a look at it? And so I just think there are lots of questions, and I'm not going to answer them because I don't have the answer, but I agree with you that we can't take this fracking. Fracking could have some huge problems in front of it within days, weeks, months, and years. And that industry could change pretty fast, pretty quickly. As quickly as it appeared, it could disappear, especially if you have an environmental mindset south of the border. So I think they're good questions, and we just can't take it for granted that what we see in front of us today is a new fact, new history.
One of the things you said reminds me of one of my favorite quotes. The number of things I know nothing about is growing at an alarming rate. But Mike does know about them, so I'm going to go to Dr. Person now. He's got something.
Thanks. Well, one issue I think that's important, I mean, at least in theory, but not in practice, Canada is supposed to be an economic union. And, with gains, some specialization across the provinces, a portfolio of different assets. But we don't run like an economic union. In fact, there seems to be more integration within the European economic community than there is in Canada. And for a variety of factors, far better mobility north-south than east-west. So when we talk about issues of pipelines, there's an extraordinarily important role here for the federal government. There are certain types of issues that are strategic, and as Peter said, governments owe it to realize the full value of their natural resources for Canadians. And I think that really does put the onus on the federal government to understand that this, like the St. Lawrence Seaway, like the C.D. Howe and the First Pipeline, there are strategic investments that are important. You look at what we do within a province, we'll have utility corridors. And we have those in place because we know that type of infrastructure is extraordinarily important for the economic development of a province. I mean, you would think we would view access to markets and the equivalent of utility corridors, whether it's for a national electricity grid or whether it's for pipelines, as being as important to the country as a whole as it is to any one province. So, as I would say, as we look at this, I think, the province is bearing the burden of this, but there certainly is an extraordinarily important role for the federal government because one province cannot do it alone.
Peter.
Well, Todd, your question is, will we have buyers? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. This world needs energy at an alarming rate. The story about the other side of the world, whether it's the 1.3 billion people in China or India or anywhere else in the world, this story has not gone away. So there's going to be no shortage of buyers of our valuable energy. And the story for us is even better because one of the consequences of having these low prices that have been prolonged is it's made us much more competitively minded in the industry. In other words, we have learned to live with lower prices. They're not optimal, but it has made us much more tuned to the cost side of the equation. So when we do enter the global markets, I do believe we're going to be extremely competitive. We just need to get to those other buyers. The other thing that we tend to forget, maybe it's a Canadian thing, we tend to be very modest or underplay what our strengths are, but if you actually look at the world and say how many major producers of oil and gas out there that are actually free market, politically stable, respect the rule of law, environmentally responsible, et cetera, there are not very many of them. In fact, the list is extremely short. I would say that the only others that are comparable, and they're not as big as us in terms of our output, would be Norway and Australia. Okay? So the world does want Canadian energy. The world does want access to responsible Canadian energy. We can provide it. We can provide it competitively. We can be very prosperous by it. We just have to, as Mike and the others have said, learn to work together to get it done.
I want to shift gears just a little bit, and maybe then we'll start with Michael with this question. Shifting just a little bit away from the energy question, yet related, one of the things I think that's bedeviled Alberta and policymakers is lack of diversity in this province. So the question I want to pose to the panelists, are there ways we can diversify the province, or in fact, is that even possible from a policy perspective to diversify the province? Let's start with Michael, if you want.
No, I had an answer all prepared for the previous one.
Oh,
wow. Completely changed my train
Too
of
bad.
thought. You know, the question of diversity and diversification is something that we look at a lot at the Canada West Foundation. It's one of the most common issues and worries that Albertans face. Like, are we too reliant on our natural resources? Should we try to branch off into other areas? And you know, there isn't really a good answer to that question. I think that a lot of people who focus on diversification as an objective tend to look at it in the sense that we need to, being a hewer of wood in a drawer of water is a bad thing, and we need to, you know, become manufacturers, or we need to move away from that. But I think there's something to be said for dancing with the one who brung you. And this, I mean, our resource wealth is our strength, and I think this is something that we need to build upon. There are diversification opportunities within upstream and downstream of the oil and gas sector, but I think this is our main strength, and we'd be foolish not to capitalize on it.
Other panelists? Angus?
You know, I think one of the challenges we have, we're landlocked, so it's difficult for us to build something big here and transport it to Ontario, transport it to Ohio. But if you take a look at our universities, you take a look at our medical facilities, those are things that people from around the world come. And one of the things that I know, especially in Europe and even in China, you know, they're starting to teach science in China in English. So instead of their students having to go outside to the world, they can bring in the best professors back into China to teach their students. Coming back to the fact that we're in a global working place. And so when you take a look at our universities, you know, we're in the top 100 at the University of Alberta. Why are we in the top 10? You know, in the hospital cares and cancer and the fight and the work that we're doing, why aren't we focusing on that from that aspect to it? So there are lots of things that we could do that aren't capital intensive, that we have to have a big, huge infrastructure to develop a city. But right now, the Premier's pointed out, 100,000 people came to this province last year. That's larger than the city of Red Deer. In the last month, we had 10,000 new employees. And you know what? Our unemployment didn't drop. Why? It's still 4.5%, a great number. But our unemployment didn't drop because we had more people in Alberta coming to Alberta to look for work. So we've got people here, as Peter says, people want Canadian products. But you know, we should be looking maybe at different ideas than just where we've looked in the past. So going to the future, whether it's our universities, we take a look at our children and our children's children. So there are lots of things we could be doing, adding value. It could be in the chemical industry. Like, there's just so many different things. But certainly when you take a look at healthcare and take a look at education, you know, we're already global competitors.
Okay, we got 3 minutes left on this. I want to turn to Mike and then to Peter.
Okay, just a couple points. First is certainly when you look at the impact that the operating side of the oil sands has had on the Alberta economy. I mean, the 24/7 operations, they have huge supply chains. Just have to look at Nisku to get a sense that this is what really driving the economy, and it is diversification. And you look at our research-intensive universities and the potential spin-offs that will emerge from them. Tradable services. Calgary has a global footprint, whether it's in finance or it's environmental consulting, seismic imaging. So we are diversifying, but a lot of it is related to where we've acquired our skills, which is in the energy sector. And I mean, the reality is mature manufacturing is going to go offshore. Anything that can be mature and easily replicated and scaled is going to go offshore, whether it's a tradable service or whether it's manufacturing. So we have to focus in those areas where we have a competitive advantage and exploit it and explore it and export it globally.
Peter?
Well, I just certainly support diversification, and I think there's a panel that's going to be talking more about that later. But the flip side of that is there's something very powerful about saying we want to be the best at something in the world. Right? I mean, the people in Silicon Valley don't lay awake at night thinking, how am I going to get into oil and gas? You know, they lay awake at night and saying, how am I going to be the best in the technology sector? And I think we have that kind of core here. We need to be less humble and just say we are going to offer the best barrel of oil in the world, the best cubic foot of natural gas, the best electron of electricity, whatever. And that's what we should focus on. I'm not saying don't diversify, but at the same time, I am saying let's not dilute all our efforts and be jack of all trades, master of none. Let us be master of the energy industry globally.
So we've got about a minute left, which I will leave to Mike, and you can answer the question that you wanted to answer previously. I feel so bad.
Now I forgot that
Go
answer.
ahead.
Well, Todd's first question was about how long this price differential we're facing now is going to last, and I think the simple answer is it's going to last for as long as we're a prisoner to the current transportation network that we have. We did a study which looked at future Chinese oil demand just as one market in all of developing Asia. And by about 2035, China is expected to need to import 3 times as much oil as Alberta produces today. And this is a huge opportunity, and whether or not we get access to that market through BC, through the Gulf Coast, or even through Eastern Canada, this is something that's what we need to do to close this price differential. And it's not just one pipeline that's going to solve all these problems. We need to build an entire network.
Okay. That brings us to the 10 minutes for the panelists. Now what we'd like to do is turn it over to the audience. And what we are going to do is we are going to begin the question, or the audience participation with a question from the Leader of the Opposition, Danielle Smith. Is she? Oh, here she is.
I have a microphone. Would you like this
and
one?
we're going to ask you to go to David in the microphone there.
Thank you. Hello, panelists. I think my question is probably targeted at Peter Tersakian. Could you tell us, looking at the 3 different pipeline proposals or 4 different pipeline proposals that are on the table, the East Coast option, Keystone, Gateway, and the Kinder Morgan line, if everything aligned and they were approved through the regulatory process, at least in principle tomorrow, so that we could start the process of getting them fully approved, how long would it be before they were built and solving this differential problem for us?
That's a great question, and I think the answer is probably, optimally, probably about 3 to 4 years. 3 to 4 years. But that's not to say that there aren't dynamics happening in the background. I think it was already mentioned by Mike and others that in the interim, the free market has a very powerful way of trying to solve these problems, and there are many other proposals out there, including the rail. The railroad companies are looking to become much more efficient at what they're doing, and so I think it'll be a gradual improvement in the differential until such time as one of these pipelines, or more than one of these pipelines, are actually approved and constructed.
All right. Any panelists, any other responses to the question?
I just might add that, certainly we agree with Peter from his analysis from that aspect, but then all of a sudden one day you find out their vessels are on strike or the railway's on strike or something, so there's always going to be room for interruptions. And on Keystone, it's already started. It's just a question of getting the approval in Nebraska, and we keep on getting deferred. So when we think it's going to be in April, then all of a sudden it's going to be the end of June. And there's a process. One of the things you learn about government, as we've all learning, is that it always takes longer than one would imagine it ever should take.
Well, it does. Just say, though, that even in my sense, in my travels across this country in the last couple months, that there's a very amplified and increasingly heightened awareness of this problem. So while our perception at the moment is that these things are going to dawdle along, I would say that when there's billions of dollars being left on the table that, as I said, ripple all across the country, you're going to see an accelerated agenda. That's my prediction. You're going to see an accelerated agenda on this market diversification issue.
Michael or Mike, anything? We're going to turn it over to the audience now. If there are questions, and I have some questions coming in from the Twitter sphere, so this is all very exciting. If you do have a question from the floor, David will be roaming with the microphone. We ask that you state your name, your organization if you are representing one, and it says your residence. I'm assuming not your address, but just what city you're from. So I guess we'll start here. We've got a microphone in the center.
In the back corner too. Dan
and in the
Meads,
back.
I think you're ready to go.
So this gentleman.
Thank you all for being here today. My name is Dan Meads. I'm a poverty reduction advocate here, and I live in Calgary, Alberta. I'm constantly confused because I feel like each and every day since I moved to Alberta 3.5 years ago, I get told a number of things. One of them is that we have the fastest growing, strongest economy in the world. We are the economic engine of Canada. We have the lowest unemployment in the province. And the other thing I hear is we can't afford anything. We have a giant budget problem. And so the question that I've got and what I'd like to hear from all of you is there needs to be an answer other than what I seem to be hearing from you all, which is if we just had a bunch of pipelines, everything would be okay. Mr. Holden, I heard you talk about how we need to learn to pay for our services from taxation, and I'd like to hear a little bit about what that means to you. And let's really start a conversation today in this room about taxation in Alberta and how there needs to be something else besides the oil and gas sector funding social services and the services that Albertans need. So please, if we could just have a little bit of dialogue about taxation and what that means to Albertans. Thank you.
I'll turn it over to the panel, and if we can be brief, because we've got some questions already lining up. So, Michael.
Well, I think that what Alberta has done is we've made a policy choice in this country to finance our expenditures, at least in part, using our resource royalties. And so what we've done is we've developed a fairly generous set of government services compared to other provinces, being financed by very low levels of tax. And so there are two obvious solutions to this problem. Either we increase our tax base or we curtail our government expenditures. And I think that if we want to move to a situation where we don't rely on our resources to fund the difference, then one of those directions is what we have to take. And I don't have any particular feelings about how we should do this, but this is a decision for governments to make. But that's ultimately what would have to happen.
Anyone else? Angus?
Go ahead, Mike.
Okay, 2 points. First is that we do spend more per capita than virtually any other province, and it's not necessarily true that we get the outcomes commensurate with that expenditure. So the province has moved to results-based budgeting. So one of the ways of trying to deal with this is basically getting better bang for buck in terms of expenditures, and with that savings that you get from being more efficient in the delivery of services, either putting it into other areas or, in fact, that's one solution. The other issue is, of course, we are going to have to wean ourselves off at some point using natural resource revenues to finance the gap between our tax effort and our per capita expenditures. So inevitably, we're going to be squeezing the expenditure side, both on the operating side and on the capital budgeting side. And as Angus pointed out, there are ways of dealing with the capital side in terms of P3s and the like. So you can be more innovative in dealing with this, but I think as we do wean ourselves from reliance on natural resource revenues to fund operating, you're going to inevitably see pressures both to reduce expenditures and to look at our tax effort and the mix.
The other provinces have other gems, so to speak. Quebec Hydro, in Quebec, you have BC Hydro, hydropower. So one of the things we have to do is make sure we have balance. You take a look at it. We have the highest exemptions and lowest taxes. The concept of the result base is the first step, I think. Then you got to take a look at the sustainability. Because there are things that always comes back, Mom, why are you cutting the roasted beef in half? Well, because your grandmother did it. Why did she do it? Well, because her grandmother did it. Okay, great granny, why did you do it? It's because it didn't fit in the wood stove. And so there's some things here that we have to keep in mind as we go forward. From a standpoint, do we want, Thomas always asks the question, do you want the schools now to educate our children, or do you want them in 30 years when we can afford it? And there isn't a perfect answer to it, but the answer is we need to make sure that we are sustaining a growth economy that we have. And it's never, I was the chairman of the United Way in Edmonton for 2 years, and I will guarantee you that no matter how much money you have, it will never be enough to take care of the social needs.
Okay, we're going to move along. We're going to the question here in the center.
Thank you very much. My name's Sarah Hoffman, and I'm the board chair for Edmonton Public Schools, and proud of it. And it's a great honor to be here today. I'd like to start by trying to respond to Minister Horner's question around what do we need to ensure that we're successful in 20 years, and I think that the answer is economic diversification through an investment in education. And in terms of doing that, I think the Premier has already acknowledged that we need consistent class sizes, safe quality schools throughout our city and our province, kindergarten that's full day, particularly for those who are socially vulnerable, and staff who feel valued and respected in the workplace. And I want to say that none of this is possible if we fail as a province to provide stable, adequate, predictable funding to school boards. So I'd like our panelists to say what they think can change now to ensure that we have revenue stability so that our kids can have the same stability in the classroom.
Great question. Thank you very much, panelists. Maybe Peter, give you a chance to.
Well, again, I think your question is even related to the last gentleman's question, which relates to the preservation and prosperity in our social fabric, which relies so much on education, and what can we do now? I mean, the issues are definitely acute right now. There's a lot of change happening. There is no quick overnight fix right now, other than the quick fix is to get on with the business of sessions like this and collaborating and talking about it and making sure we move from the position of being in denial about the problem to acknowledging it, which I think we're there, and working towards remedying it. I just want to say one thing, which is also related to your question and also to the last gentleman, and that is this: I want to make a slight correction. I call it a correction in thinking, because the assertion was made that if we build the pipelines and market access, we're okay. Right? That was sort of the quote. And my position is actually, we've got a lot of work to do in making sure that that's true, but I can assure you that the converse of that statement is true, and is if we don't do the market access, get on with it, we are not okay.
Mike?
I was going to say, when you look at economic development strategies in a world of footloose individuals and footloose capital, social infrastructure, K-12, good universities, healthcare system are part of your economic development strategy, and they have to be funded appropriately if you're going to be competitive in attracting talent and retaining talent. In terms of the issue of tax effort, I probably will be the first to say then that I put my weight firmly on the side of a consumption tax because of all of its virtues, but I don't want to anticipate what other panels are going to be saying.
I'm going to go to a question actually from the Twitter sphere before we get to, then we'll go to that gentleman there. And maybe this one is for Angus, or any of you. Does the high level of the Canadian dollar adversely affect investment in our oil and gas, or does it encourage it?
It certainly has a negative impact. I mean, we're an exporter, whether it be oil or grains, wheat, lumber, whatever the case may be. I remember years ago on the forest product industry talking to a forest product analyst, and he was saying, it doesn't matter what the company's doing, it doesn't matter what's happening here and everything else, it's all about world currency. And our problem wouldn't be quite as bad today if we had a 66-cent dollar, because we'd still probably be getting $80 a barrel, in our own pockets of Canadian money. Right now we don't have that parity. So the challenge we have is that this is not a problem that we can fix. It's not a problem that you and I can fix. It's not a problem the Premier can fix. I'm not even sure the Bank of Canada can fix it. It's a problem that right now you have a global currency discounting war taking place, where Japan's trying to discount their currency. The U.S., I've said this for years, has their own trade protection policy by having a weak U.S. currency. They talk about a strong currency, they talk about a strong economy, but they're really pleased to let their U.S. dollar drift. And the Europeans are very much aware that if the euro's trading over 136, that's going to start to have a negative impact on Germany and slow down some of theirs. So currency is a really important factor. It does have an impact, and it's one of those things, it's like the price of oil, we ourselves there's nothing we can do about it.
Any other panelists want to jump in on the question about the Canadian dollar and investment?
Sure. I'll just quickly say, I'll just challenge Angus, because I like to challenge people, but I actually think a Canadian dollar being on the higher end is a good thing. Hiding behind a low dollar makes us complacent and unproductive, our industries, and uncompetitive at a time when we're trying to go more global. So I actually think that you know, this episode that we're in, this era that we're in, where our prices are low, high Canadian dollar, et cetera, is a wake-up call that was necessary, actually, for us to change.
Yeah. And maybe I would agree with you there, Peter. It's not a question that I was answering the question from this point of view, is that if the Canadian dollar was weaker, we'd have more money in our pockets, right? And we're competitors.
Well,
and it's whether you be a farmer or whatever the case would be, you've always had this problem, and you're always trying to work on it.
Okay, let's go to back there in the corner. Yes, your name and...
My name is Stephen Golub. I'm actually a manager within the Alberta Public Service. I live in Red Deer, Alberta. Red Deer has a long history of being influenced by oil and gas, Michener services, but also agriculture. And in the comments earlier today from the panel, virtually all of the comment was on oil and gas. And I'm just curious from the panel members where they see from kind of Alberta's economy going forward, where does agriculture fit in? A lot of people like to drive their cars, but a lot of people like to eat too.
Great question. Panelists.
Well, let me start first, because I am part of the Honorary Council for the Netherlands, and we're the second largest agricultural exporter in the world, so we're very focused on agriculture. You're going to see that our density, we've got the water supply, you know, in most of the province, not in the whole province, but compared to the Midwest in the United States, where 70% is irrigated land. You're going to find that universities with Calgary and Saskatchewan are working very hard to increase your productivity, and so is U of A. But I mean, we're global leaders from that aspect, and we're partners. We're working very hard with the universities to be partners on a global basis to improve agriculture. The challenge is that where's the price of wheat going to be in 2 years from now? It's all driven by the weather conditions in the Midwest. And I think the outlook is very positive, very constructive, but it's incremental. It's going to be year-by-year basis, and you're going to see a big difference in fertilizers and seeds, especially over the next 10 years.
Mike.
Well, I'm pretty positive about where agricultural prices are going, because I think it's subject to the same forces that energy is in terms of an emerging middle class in China and India. And as their lifestyles change, they both become more energy intensive as well as more value-added agricultural product intensive in some of the areas that we specialize in. So I'm positive in terms of the demand side, but I think the demographics certainly are working against agriculture, and I think we're going to see continued consolidation of farms within Alberta, and a continued decline in the absolute number of people in agriculture, but not in a decline in the value of production from agriculture.
Michael, or?
Yeah, thanks. Just to build on the comments that we've heard so far, I agree with them all, and I think that as developing Asian economies and others grow and become wealthier, we see diet changes in those markets, and there'll be more demand for protein-based foods, and which could be a boon for our cattle and hog industries. I think also that we talked earlier about diversification in Alberta, and I think that the agriculture sector is an area where we could see a lot of opportunity to build this kind of value-added product before we export.
Okay, we've got a mob building here in the middle, so we're going to go to the center aisle. Question, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Chris Skapik, and I'm a medical student and also a PhD student here in Calgary. So the Americans have seen a lot of success in their economy through investments from individuals like venture capitalists in certain sectors. What can Alberta do, this government, policies, or businesses otherwise, do to attract new investment from groups like venture capitalists in traditional markets like energy, biotechnology, agriculture, or health?
Another great question. Panelists, thoughts?
Well, since nobody's jumping up, it's a tough one. Dr. Percy talks about the free market enterprise, and certain times, the funding for your bio industry is like the farmers. It's sometimes everybody wants to get into it, and other times nobody wants to get into it. It's a very high-risk business, and a lot of the institutions that want to put money into it want to own it, and then the question is that are they good at marketing it? Other people don't want to own it, and then it's still a question of, it's like if you open up one store, how can you afford to open the second one? You think you can. You might open the second one, but you don't have any money to open the third one. So the concept is that you got to be areas of specialty. And going back to Peter Tzakian's point earlier is that, you know, we can't be first in everything, okay? So we have to pick our points. And I think that whether it's medicine, what area of medicine, if it's cancer, what area of cancer is it in? And we've got to be careful from that standpoint. If it's the oil and gas industry, if it's agriculture. So we have to do some groundwork. And the bottom line is that people have to want to put money into your business. It doesn't matter what it is. And governments cannot pick winners and losers because it doesn't matter what country, what province, what state, it just hasn't worked historically.
Okay, we're going to take another question from the floor and then back to tweet. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. I'm Guy Smith, President of the Alberta Union of Provincial Employees, and it's an honor to be here. Thank you, Premier, for inviting me. And I want to go back to the nub, the basis of the discussion that started about this thing called the bitumen bubble that we hadn't heard of before, but now it's become part of our lexicon, and the differential. And I guess I want to get, as economists and experts, your sense about the reaction to the situation about the differential as it exists now. Because looking back, we all know it fluctuates. That differential, the price of oil fluctuates. Looking back over the last 8 years or so, the highest differential was in February 2006 at about 53.7%. The lowest differential was November 2011 at about 10%. And the second lowest in differential was this last October at 10.8%. So you see it's fluctuating, and it has been much lower, or the differential has been much greater than it is now. And I'm just wondering, is it prudent, knowing that these changes happen over time, drastically, whether it's prudent for the discussion around, you know, cuts to public services and holding the line on this and that, based on the fact that we've been through this before, and this kind of, I don't want to say panic, that's the wrong word, this kind of urgency hasn't been sensed before when the provincial government has been through this. So is it prudent from an economic standpoint to be looking at this as is it as tragic as it seems to be when we've been through this before, I guess is what I'm asking.
Thank you for the question. Panelists.
You know, I think one of the things important here, we go back, Michael Percy talked about it, we talk about our results-based budgeting. And I think there's always room for improvement. Would you agree? Right? There's always room for improvement.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So before we go and make cuts, one of the things you want to do is make sure you're doing things correctly, properly, right? Correct. And I think that what we need to do is all put up as a partnership, meet in a room and say, hey, what could we be doing better? What's important? What are your priorities? What are your priorities? And what are your priorities? And then go through that process. So I don't think at this point in time what the government's trying to do, and it doesn't matter what the government's trying to do because today we're talking about ourselves. So from my point of view, I'm with you. I want to make sure that what we're doing is we're making the best decisions. Peter Tzakian earlier talked about, like, the Canadian dollar when it's high. That's a problem for us. A problem is your best opportunity to get things better. So the question is, how can we do things better? That's the question we should be asking today, not what cuts we can make, but what can we do better? That's our first question, and I'm going to leave it there.
And then we're going to go to Mike.
Okay. Couple points. The first is the issue that every finance minister faces when you have this type of a shortfall is it transitory or is it permanent, right? Dick Johnson, got it wrong. He'd hoped, the fingers were crossed, that it was transitory, and it wasn't. And when you look at kind of the structure of forces that are out there in terms of the changes in the price regime, the differentials between Brent and West Texas Intermediate, then Western Canadian Select, and then the constraints on access to external markets, it really does lead one to believe that this is more of a medium-term issue than just a year-to-year, that we can whistle by the graveyard and get by. I think you got to plan for the worst in this and hope for the best. So I tend to be a little more pessimistic in the short to medium term, but very optimistic medium to long.
Angus, briefly.
I just want to, remember Peter talked about the pipelines? You know, we need the pipelines. It's worse if we don't have the pipelines. So on this concept of partnership, is it if our unions or our school boards, healthcare, whatever the case may be, if nobody can come up with a solution of how to make it better, then you got to make cuts. So I think it's important to everybody to make sure it's the same way we need pipelines, we need to do things better. And it doesn't mean I don't know what the changes are, but just keep that in mind, because I think Albertans are looking for positive change. We're positive people, and we're not trying to have cuts. What we want to do, you're our neighbor. On the left side, across the street, right side, the teachers are our neighbors, everybody. We're a community, and we don't want to see you unemployed. We don't want to see people cut. So the challenge that we have in front of us, everybody today, is how can we do things better? It's our opportunity.
Okay, thank you for the question. I'm going to go to a question from the Twitter sphere, and this one I'm going to pose specifically to Peter, but the other panelists, if you have thoughts. Why not take oil north and connect to TAPS with 660K barrels a day while we develop an Arctic port for oil and LNG?
Well, that's a great question. That has not gone unnoticed by our friends in the Northwest Territories. I was talking with them just on Friday, and they're quite excited about the potential of the Northwest Territories being a major center for not only distribution, but also another source of oil and gas, sort of a renewal of their industry, which sort of went into sort of stalled a few decades ago. So it's possible, and I mean, I think more broadly, the answer to that question, or the discussion around that question, is that when you have such a wide differential, when you have so many $1 billion effectively being sitting on the table, that all sorts of innovative proposals are coming to the table. There's at least 3 proposals that I know of that are being talked about to the north. There's a couple of proposals to the east, a few to the west, south, and so on. I mean, that's the beauty of the free market and solving these kind of problems. It is going to take time, and that does not absolve us of our responsibility as government, industry, collectively as citizens of this country, to work together to ensure that it is done responsibly and quickly.
Okay, we've got 8 minutes and 30 seconds. I think this is actually a time bomb, so I want to respect this little thing here. So we're going to go to the aisle and the next question.
Hi, my name is Daniel Eggert. I'm with the Edmonton Mennonite Center for Newcomers and a resident of Edmonton. Two-pronged question. First question is, what can we learn from the state of Texas when they were faced with economic vulnerability in the early 80s? They created an intentional economic diversification strategy and implemented it, and now have a very diversified strategy beyond oil and gas. Second question is it possible to diversify in an economy, in an environment where we are developing our natural resources at a rate that exceeds our ability to provide adequate labor, and also now, in recent years, adequate capital, where we have to go to the Far East to gain capital just to develop our resources? So if we can try and tackle those questions.
Great questions this morning. Panelists. No one wants to? Come on. Surely one of you.
Well, Texas has a coastline, so I guess we can learn that.
Well, I mean, there's a couple of differences, though, between Texas and Alberta, not the least of which is climate. But in terms of just distribution of resource rents, the province here is steward, owns the resource rents, captures it. In Texas, it's fee simple, and the rents are distributed according to ownership of the land, and you want to own a share of the rents in Texas, you buy Imperial or you buy Exxon. So there's a difference then in the way that the rents are distributed. And I think, as Peter suggested, access, they're fortunate, they do have deep water ports. So I think that's played a significant role in their diversification.
Peter?
Well, I would just say that I can't comment on what we can learn from them on diversification. That's a matter for another panel. But honestly, I don't think we can learn too much from them on the oil and gas. I mean, oftentimes we teach them how to do stuff, so I'm proud of that.
Yeah. Quick follow-up comment or question?
Just on the Texas file, it's worth noting in the 80s they were 20% plus reliant on oil and gas, and now they're about 8% reliant on oil and gas as a principle. So, all right.
There you go. Okay. That's your 10 seconds. You got it.
Okay, I think we've read it. So.
Point made.
We've read it.
Okay.
Please.
You got your point.
Photo op's over.
And rate of growth?
I think one of the things, you represent a great community organization, for new Canadians. And the concept of labor and bringing people into this province, unfortunately, is not something we can control directly. And I want to congratulate you for you and your group and the efforts that you've made, because moving from some part of the world where they may never have seen snow, they don't know how much fun you can have when it's 40 below out, is really important. And the challenge, one of the greatest things we have in Alberta is the community that we have. We're a community of volunteers, okay? We're acceptable people. We just accepted this. They had their 10 seconds, out they go. You know, we didn't shoot them, we didn't beat them up, we didn't have that aspect to it. No, I say this seriously from the standpoint, but the concept is that your organization is important. And I wish in many ways that we had more Canadians, new Canadians here, so we could build a healthier community. And I think when we bring people in, we're bringing people in with a skill set, by and large, and then that's part of the area of development. And I think you have to be careful, going back to Peter's point, is that we can't be first in everything. We can be first in a couple of things. And let's make sure what we're really good at, try to be the best at it. There's an expression, if you're not first or second, be gone. And I think when it comes to the oil and gas extraction and the environmental, we're trying to be first in the world. We are with the carbon capture, right? When you take a look at the Netherlands, you take a look at Alberta, we're world leaders, okay? We're world leaders in carbon capture storage. So let's develop it, let's be proud of it, versus trying to put it in the closet.
Okay, I do want to get to these final two questions here and a couple more questions from Twitter. So your question, sir.
Thank you. Mark Halati, former MLA and Honorable Premier, thank you so much for the invitation. I appreciate it. Mike, I was just reflecting, it's been 20 years since you and I and several others have done this exact same conversation, and here we go again. And you know what? Over the last 20 years, we've really developed our social infrastructure. It's been great. We are cutting edge. We are leaders in so many areas of education and medical and so on. A few quick comments back to the diversification question. Albertans always rise to the challenge. You either grow or you wither and die. We as Albertans choose to grow, and we have the infrastructure to grow today. We need to do what Premier Lougheed did 40 years ago, folks. We need to do and continue the development of our oil and gas industry to a whole new level. This does mean manufacturing and driving down and creating it. That's what creates the diversification and lack of less dependency on the changing prices of our oil and gas. From a competitive point of view, globally, the Asian tigers, including China, are having to raise the value of their currencies. Angus, you talked to this, right? And this is what's happening. This will create a more balanced trade worldwide, all right? This avoids the imbalances that we've seen over the last 25 or 30 years. And there has to be an equal trade back and forth so you don't have economies drying up and in unemployment.
So I'm going to...
My question,
please.
That was it, that was great. My question is, do you believe we can diversify our economy by developing the manufacturing industry over the next 25 years in a bigger picture for the oil and gas industry? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I'm going to give 1 minute for whoever wants to answer that, because we've got one final
I
question.
think NISCU is a classic example of the capacity to respond to markets and the array and diversity of manufacturing that occurs there. And the beauty will be when, in fact, it's not only destined for the oil sands and conventional oil and gas, but we're exporting significantly, which in some areas they're due. So I think, you know, the catalyst for that type of export performance and diversification is going to be driven from the energy sector, and it'll be in those areas where we can acquire the skills, we can shift forward some of the costs because of labor shortages. But I don't see why, you know, strong, widespread diversification, us looking like Ontario or Quebec. And certainly they've got their own set of problems with everything going offshore.
Michael, did you want to?
Oh, just to add to that, I was actually going to mention the NISCU example myself, but on top of that, there is also a lot of opportunities for us to look at how we can contribute on the environmental side. Whether it's carbon capture and storage, whether it's other product and process innovations, the industry in Alberta is under a lot of pressure nationally and internationally to reduce our carbon footprint, to reduce the amount of water that we consume, and to reduce the impact on land. And I think that there are a lot of opportunities for us to diversify the sector based on responding to those challenges as well.
Peter, very briefly.
Yeah, just quick. Actually, I think the answer to the question is yes, we can, and I'll tell you why. Over the last, certainly over the last 5 to 7, call it 10 years, the province and the industry here has invested a lot into infrastructure and institutions. And you need infrastructure and institutions to attract people and attract industries. And so I actually think we need to build off of that.
Okay, I'm going to go to the very final question here.
Hi there. Thank you. Sorry, this is not tall enough, but we'll make this work. My name's Troy Millington. I live in Calgary. I'm a stay-at-home dad to 2 girls. Thank you. 4 and 2. And it's sort of in that direction that I asked the question. 2 questions I have. One is, at $12 million per day, I talked to an analyst at CERI, Canadian Energy Research Institute, and that was the number I got. $12 million per day being lost on not getting our oil done. What would happen if some of that loss was applied to getting the pipelines up and running? I imagine that there are groups who could make use of that. So that's one question. Perhaps Peter might be able to address something in that line. The second one was along the lines of what Michael was saying. We've gone through this boom and bust cycle over and over and over again in Alberta. I started out in Vancouver. I'm here now. And it blows me away that with the amount of money that is being produced, we can't get this sorted out. So my question is, what would happen if we were to move away from relying solely on the resource extraction and start diversifying in a focused manner in just the energy sector? Can we focus into the wind production, the solar production? Perhaps we become inventive and create the best nuclear plant that ever existed and sell that to China for their energy resources, energy needs. What about that kind of diversification instead of just make money, get oil, make money, get oil?
Okay, thanks, Troy. We are out of time, but I will allow the panelists, if you have a real brief response to Troy's question.
Well,
maybe
one
just
of the reasons I'm pessimistic about broad-based diversification is that anything that's labor-intensive in this economy is squeezed out, simply given the demands of the energy sector. So we're naturally pushed into those things that are human capital intensive, high tech, or somehow related to the energy base. So, I mean, markets do work, and the market for labor certainly works, and if anything's labor intensive, it's hard to be competitive in this economy.
Peter, looks like you want the very last word.
Just really quickly, Troy, I'm a stay-at-work dad, so... no, listen, seriously, first of all, the first point is I don't believe really the government should be in the business of business, even though notionally what you're saying is makes sense. I do think, though, that the government and business needs to work together more closely. It really doesn't really matter which one is the one that's promoting it, because the issues are social license issues across the country, and the government and industry has to come together to collaborate, to work together, and resolve those issues with the citizens of this country.
Okay. Well, we are out of time for the first session. I ask that you join me in thanking our 4 panelists for their comments this morning.